Welcome to another episode of Heated Conversations. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. I'm excited to have Ms. Brandi Smith on the podcast, and we're going to kind of discuss different type of topics. We're going to do a series of these. We're going to do 4 different ones. Today, specifically, we're going to talk about prehab. Now, if you don't know Brandi Smith is the founder of 10.0 PT and Invincible Athlete. She has a program where she kind of breaks down different things for gymnastics gyms and different other types of gyms and to try to help give parents, coaches, athletes, owners a full perspective on how to really help athletes kind of be better and gyms kind of be better with their products and their services that they have for their athletes. And so I'm excited to kind of discuss different topics with her. And as I said, today we're going to kind of talk about prehab. And I'll have her information below so that you can check in on her website and even contact her if you want more information about some of the topics that we discuss and also some of her different programs that she offers on her website. So let's tune into this episode with Brandi Smith. Brandi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Peterson. I'm super excited to be here.
Yes, and I appreciate you taking the time to kind of discuss this and have these conversations. And I think it's really important because not all the time, at least in the US, right, where we have the full knowledge and capacity to know everything that encompasses what we do as especially gymnastics coaches, right? There's times where we're going to be almost required to step up and kind of be a psychologist depending on what's happening with that athlete. There's times where, you know, there might be certain injuries or even sorenesses that occur that we may not have the knowledge a PT might have, or there might be nutritional things that we see that are happening within our athletes, and even having wanting to have those discussions with um, parents, but we're not dietitians. And so it's nice to sometimes have people who are in the field who understand the sport of gymnastics as well as are in a professional field like yourself as a PT to kind of discuss some of these things. And so before we really start, I like to kind of do some intro questions. Okay, I'm going to start with one. Now, if you could see anybody live in concert, dead or alive, who would you go see and who would you take with you?
Ooh, if I could see anyone in concert, dead or alive, who would I go see? Man, and I've seen some good concerts. That's really challenging because there's some really good music in this world. Oh gosh, I don't know. I wasn't prepared for that, Peterson. Um, who would I go see? Um, It's funny because, what came to mind was Journey, but
I
I've
love
seen
it.
them.
I love it. I love it.
I've seen them, and I think I would take my daughter just to blow her mind because she's, like, 10 and, like, total different generation, and she's a Swiftie, and so it would just be fun.
Yeah. And sometimes I like to ask those questions just because, again, what comes to mind and it shows people kind of who you are, the things that you love, right? And also separate between like the human and what you do, right? The hat that you might wear. And I think it's cool to make that connection and to know that we're all human that do different things and to make that connection. And so, as we were talking about off camera, I love music, right? As you can see, my guitars and stuff like that. And those are things that really connect people. And so I'm excited that these conversations can connect people to each other. And these are going to be helpful conversations. And so to kind of start off with our topic, in gymnastics, one of the things is we want to get our athletes most prepared to perform, right? To do their skills and the physical prep of it. Now, some of the things that may not be something that we as coaches may do very well or have as much understanding or might just be eerie on is prehab, like what things are appropriate to do and what areas we should work or how often we should work it. And some of these things are meticulous and they take a lot of time. So can we kind of talk about in a if we're going to break down a season, right? What kind of prehab should be done at what times?
That's a really good question. So one thing that you said earlier was this, that I wanted to comment on was this idea that coaches like sometimes have to wear different hats. And I think one of my biggest passions to educating coaches is that I want you guys to have the knowledge. You guys are like our little fingers on the ground. Like you see, you're the first responder. Like ultimately, you're the first responder for mental health issues. You're the first responder for nutrition issues. You're the first responder for injury. You're the first responder for biomechanics problems. Like all of those things, you're there, right? And you see the athlete way more than the parents, and you're seeing perspectives. You're seeing the athlete strained and stressed by loads and by time and by endurance and stress of being a kid and growing up and adolescence, all of those things. And so ultimately it is the coaches that are the first responders, and I feel like it's a place where there's a lack of consistent education over time. It's not like one of my biggest complaints has been that I love, 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 love teaching for the various organizations I teach for, but we come in and we teach a 1 hour session, fire hydrant you with a whole bunch of information, and then hope that you can like make lifestyle changes on your own, which is
Yeah.
not human nature, right? And so that's part of the reason I've done what I've done with my programs, because I feel like to help with consistent education, to help with like all the troubles that arise when you're trying to make behavioral changes, both within yourself, within a program, and with other humans involved who also have their own idea of what's proper and what's right and et cetera. And it's a lot of obstacles to overcome. And so I feel like the important part is not to be alone in that, and to also have someone who specializes in that um, area of expertise, be it mental health, be it physical therapy, be it biomechanics, strength, flexibility, et cetera, or nutrition, right? Having people to support you through that journey of making change. And helping also, it's nice to have, it's interesting, like you said, in the US, we have so much opportunity and there's so much science behind exercise, the body, nutrition, mind, neuroscience. Like all these things are well researched and very, very behind on implementation in the world of sports. And I'm not going to name any one sport. People always try to say one sport's more behind than the other, but the reality is they're all behind. And there is a behind innateness to it because it takes 4 years to be published anyways. That's the average. And by the time it hits the publication, then it takes many years for that to get trickled down through education. And then you have years to get it to actually trickle down through behavioral changes in the sport and culture itself. So, that's kind of the reality that we're battling. So I just want to acknowledge that
Yeah.
for people and recognize that we're all human and we're all trying. And what I love about the coaches over the years, because I've been teaching for USA Texas Gymnastics since 2008 and USA Gymnastics since 2010. And I've just watched the coaching culture change and the dynamic of coaches change. And what I love is this increased surge of seeking of knowledge by coaches, young coaches these days. And even, and I can't just blatantly say that they're all young. They're not, but there's an uptick, even in people my age and older. I know I look 20 something, but I'm not. Um, and but like people who've been doing it for a long time also seeking knowledge. So if we are in the age where everyone wants to know the answers and they
Yeah.
want to make the changes, and I think that that's like something I really want to acknowledge and I appreciate, I guess. So on to the prehab question though. What needs to be done and when and how much? There are certain things in like the sport of gymnastics, we're just talking gymnastics, that I think just need to be a part of your program. And they don't actually have to be extras. They don't have to be add-ons. So for instance, when people stretch their wrists, they always tend to like stretch their wrists so that they like push everything down. And when they do that, there's a tendency because of the sport of gymnastics, overusing certain muscles, and without going into a ton of detail, but imbalances that tend to happen. This row of bones on the bottom of the wrist tends to drop. And what happens when we do the general basic, like roll our wrist out, which this is really good neurologically, so there's nothing wrong with this, it's great. But then when people go and they force their wrist, and then they force their wrist in each direction on the floor, what tends to happen is they actually tend to overstretch the capsule of the wrist instead of actually stretching muscles. What happens is that proximal row, the row of wrist bones called carpal bones that run right here, it tends to drop. And so I don't have it anymore, but you used to be able, like I have video after video of athletes who have this nice dip. There's this big dip here that shouldn't really exist, because when these bones are in their right place, there's this nice straight kind of line, like you can see in my wrist, there's a nice straight line. But you'll see this big dip. And so what's happening is they're actually hyper stretching their capsule of their joint instead of stretching all the wrist muscles around it. So one super simple thing that people can do is literally what I call a lift. Now this is being videoed as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I have it on my hands because I was in a wedding this last weekend, but I'm just going to acknowledge that because everybody's probably staring at it. It's not dirty. It's just really pretty design. But you have this little bone on the pinky side of your finger, and it's called the pisiform. It's this little bitty round, tiny bone. And if you find that little bone and you put your finger all the way across like that, just your pointer finger on the opposite side, and then your thumb underneath, you have this big bump on the back of your wrist called the ulna. It's the ulnar styloid actually, but it's on the pinky side. There's a big bump there. You want your thumb to be below that. And so your pointer finger is on the pisiform, the pokey little ball on the palm of your hand, right at the bottom. Finger goes all the way across, thumb goes below. And if you do just a little lift, you can lift those bones centered in their little happy space. So what's considered like a neutral wrist position is about 30 degrees of wrist extension. That's how they cast athletes, like if they break something. So if you do a little squeeze, now those joints and bones are nice and in their happy place. From there, I love, love, love my favorite wrist exercise, which is super simple. And I'm not joking you, a set of five repetitions is massive. Athletes will increase their wrist range of motion 20 to 30 degrees, like that. It's a neuromuscular thing. It just helps things. But now you have the joint centered, curl the fingers in, and you just do little curls. You do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, keep it curled and punch. And if you do a set of five little done, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 curling, and then punch out the arm, keeping the wrist curled, you'll feel it come up here. So when you're going like this, you'll feel it pull down, but then as you punch out, you'll feel it rise up higher. And so it should be of significant tension. I'm doing a good amount of squeeze. And so that exercise in itself, every athlete should do because it's super simple. It's super, super helpful. It balances out some muscle imbalances. It's very simple, basic wrist thing. The next piece, don't change what you're doing for your wrist. Do all those little pushing things on the floor, but do the lift. That's it. Super simple. You can just like literally do your lift and then you do your pressing, then you do your pressing, and you can go side to side. You can turn the hands out, but you just do one wrist at a time because you're having to do the lift. And by doing that, you're centering those joints in, and then you're stretching out everything around it. So that's something that should be done every athlete, every workout. Doesn't matter what time of year it is, that needs to be done. And if you have boys and they're doing a lot of strength, I recommend that little punch exercise between big strength moves. So lots of rings, lots of pommels, where they're overusing a lot of their muscles in their forearm, right? That will help kind of counter some of that overuse. Another piece that I think every athlete should do in gymnastics is bridges, and bridges with bands. So you'll see on my Instagram that I use bands a lot. In particular, I love the 2/8 bands because I can do a lot with them. They're magical. I say they're magical because they last a long time. Um, they they last a long time. They I can make them really long. And so I make these really giant long bands that usually take two 2/8 bands tied together. So you can see I tie them together. And I love them because they have like these little loops all throughout them and they last longer. And though sometimes I'll choose to use TheraBand because there is a negative feedback. Sometimes it happens from TheraBand. If your head is kicking out, you are going to get your hair.
Mm,
And you will quickly learn to open your shoulders and get your head in a neutral position because you don't want the band on your head.
yeah.
But at the same time, sometimes it's not comfortable on everyone's body. And those bands, the TheraBands break pretty quickly at some point, whereas these have lasted way longer. So if I was a gym and I wanted to make an investment, these are an investment that would last longer. And you don't have to replace them over and over like you do the TheraBands. I mean, like basically every year you're replacing TheraBands. Um, and they pop and they snap and they do all the things. And these don't do that. So that being said, and I love the guys at 2/8 Band. By the way, Michael Wellington is one of the inventors, amazing running coach, and he's part of my Invincible Athlete team now because we met Facebook, man. I had no idea. Like we met through Facebook because I liked his product. And then he came and we enjoyed GAT together. Anyways, he's a brilliant running coach, brilliant running coach. So anyways, so back to the bridge. Everyone should do a bridge, everyone, including boys. And the moment we start letting them not do bridges, we're in trouble. It really is, you use it or lose it, right? But I think bridges are done horribly.
Mm,
I'm going to go all out on a limb. I think they're done horribly all over the country, all the time, every day. And I think that it comes back to how we traditionally teach bridges. We teach bridge with, I didn't bring, well, I like to draw things. Hold on one second.
yeah.
Better if I draw it. Let me grab something to draw with. I almost
Perfect.
grabbed it earlier. So let me get me a new page here.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, so the thing with bridges, and the reason I like to draw this, and we'll just label it something. Okay, I'm supposedly getting up in the technology world. It's a remarkable too, which I love, but I'm still learning it. So what most people do with a bridge is they do a straight leg bridge. And when they do a straight leg bridge, all right. And here's my little ponytail. And I'm not smiling. Okay. All right. So most people with a bridge, what they do is they do a straight leg bridge. And number one, when the athlete is pushing through the legs in a straight leg bridge, they're pushing a lot of compressive forces right at the low back. And then the next piece of that is that most athletes never work on their thoracic extension properly and they don't open up their shoulders. So now if I'm not opening up my shoulder, I'm not getting thoracic extension, I'm forcing everything from the upper body as well into my low back. And I create a scenario for low back pain, hypermobility at L5S1, which then leads to stress reactions, stress fractures, and spondylolisthesis. And so I don't see anywhere in gymnastics where this shape is actually desired. And so a true bridge that people do and teach, to me, teaches a shape that we don't even dynamically run through. Because if I want to get a Tkachev, then why don't I stick my feet up on a wall? Because that's a Tkachev. If I want to get a good Yurchenko entry, why don't I stick my feet up on the wall? Because that's actually a better entry for Yurchenko. I don't want their feet down below their head to do a Yurchenko or Tkachev. That's going to be a butt skimming Tkachev. That's not going to work out. So why am I training that sustained for however long, right? Over, over years, over months and years and et cetera, right? And then going, why do we have back pain? Well, this is not my goal. And then saying, oh, it's a shoulder flexibility. It used to be, I don't even know if it's still on the TOPS thing, but this used to be, they would put that stick and they say, push your shoulders to the stick for the tops training. And so you can tell me if that's still there. I hope it's not, but it was there. Is it still there?
I'm not sure, but from when we had athletes who were doing tops, I don't remember that being a part of it. So I'm
I
assuming it's
think
not
they
part of it.
changed it like a while back, but but the idea, because it was taught like that for so long as part of the tops actual testing, you know how that lingers, right? So that idea so the thing was, it was a shoulder flexibility test, and they would put a stick in front of them and they'd make them push forward till their shoulders hit the stick. And that wouldn't be quote unquote a shoulder flexibility test. In reality, it was how much can you hyperflex at your L5S1, and can I also sublux my glenohumeral joint out of socket, which happens all the time on bridges. I have a video on my Instagram of a girl. I have my hands in her armpit. She goes into a bridge, and you'll see my thumbs pop forward. And what's happening is she's actually subluxing her glenohumeral joint. Happens all the time in bridges, all the time. Now, if you do a bridge the way I'm about to show you, it's going to prevent a whole bunch of things. So what I want to see, so this is what I call the TP. Now, I'll have to give props to Gina Pongetti because she called it the TP back in like 2010 when she presented at National Congress on, I don't remember exactly what the title was, but she was talking about this concept of like making a TP versus an arch. So giving props to exactly where that came from originally, or the first time I heard it presented. So what I like to see, my gymnast has kind of big feet. All right, so what I want to see, and you're going to see that this gymnast is smiling because she has no back pain. And I guarantee it. I can almost 100, it's like 90% of the time. If they have back pain with the bands, they're doing something wrong and we need to change their cueing. And they need to do more breathing. And then everything is good. So what I want to see is a nice, beautiful arc. I want to see where the entire load is shared throughout the wrist, elbow, shoulder, thoracic spine goes into extension, a nice complete kinetic chain, spinal extension, hip extension, and I want the knees bent because I don't want the force going into the back. And I'm doing this to do a mobility exercise and to kick on actively the posterior chain, which is all the muscles on the back of the body. And that's very effective. You want that posterior chain activation in this ability if you want an athlete to quickly flip over on a flick, right? Or quickly get into a vault on a Yurchenko vault, quickly hit that dynamic shape on a Tkachev, right? Like, so for me, I think every athlete should do bridges, but they should do them with bands because, and you can use a TheraBand if you already have them at your gym. But it needs to be quite a long TheraBand, a little bit longer than their wingspan. And so what they do is you just take the middle of the band, place it right over their rib cage, right below their pecs, and then they come around the back and they cross the band over their back like a backpack. I say put it on like a backpack, right? And then if they're having a 2/8 band, what I love, like, so I had a little girl she was 5 yesterday doing her bridges. And she had a really sloppy bridge, just like everything went into her back. And she was tiny, so she actually had to put her hand in the third loop. So I had her do that. Medium size, you can probably put the second loop. Average people, first loop. And if they're having trouble holding it on, you can put, the 2/8 bands has a special cool thing that you can lock it in on the wrist at the same time. So you have one on the hand and one on the wrist. If you're just using TheraBand, then you can make loops on the TheraBand, or you can just put it flat on the ground and their palm stays on top of it. All right, now I did not know I was going to do a bridge, but I don't have video prepared to share. So I will show you a bridge today. Now I will tell you, this is the precursor to this. When I was an athlete, I was the athlete who skipped bridges, who by high school had her feet up on 2 or 3 panel mats and was like, how many do we have to do? Because I had back pain. I was in my fellowship program, I was the classic case of testing all the hypermobility testing. And so I was tested thousands of times over a period of time. Now, between nutrition and doing what I now do now, I actually have negative testing on all of those things, which I did not have, 10 years ago. But 2 years after having my daughter, I discovered a nutritional component to help with hypermobility, on top of the things I was already doing. And that just kicked over the edge. And I blew my mentor's mind away when I was like, test me, test me. And he was like, Brandi, what did you do? Because he's from the Netherlands. And and I said, I did collagen. And he was like, what? He was just kind of blown away. I was like, because I had been doing other things and still having some flare-ups periodically. And so if you change your movement and some of your nutrition, you can help support when there's too much ligament laxity. So that being said, I preface that because my bridges don't hurt me now. And I'm, quote unquote, the body is evidently older than it used to be when I was in college. And I don't have that problem, right? So like it doesn't match up. It doesn't match up and so what it doesn't match up to what people believe is pain, right? So people believe that as we age, we're supposed to have pain. Or like, oh, I'm an old gymnast. I love hearing coaches say that. Well, I'm an old gymnast, that's why it hurt. No, pain is not normal. Pain is an experience and it's information from the brain. And it's telling me that it doesn't like something. Like something's not right. So either I don't like the biomechanics, I need more mobility somewhere else, or I have a fear component, or I've created a file around an injury situation that I keep accessing every time I do, you name it, X, whatever it is that I do. So that's neuroscience. So what we call therapeutic neuroscience education. So that being said, I changed my biomechanics and I already had my mind changed. So my bridge is very different. Now, my bridge is not going to be like your athletes, but I can at least demonstrate what it looks like. Okay, so since we're on the video, I want to show it. So super simple. You're already doing bridges. I recommend 3 to 5 bridges every single workout. And I do them. Now, I'm not doing the kickover today. I don't practice those. I'll do the bridge and then I'll tell you about the kickover. So, what you do is you have them lay down on their back and they put the bands down. Now for me, I'm actually going to go in, I think, one more loop because I need a little more resistance. So I put my hands down like an old school bridge, right? Just old school bridge. Now, most athletes put their feet right next to their butt and they try to use their hamstrings to shove themselves up like this. I want their feet away from their bottom, feet straight forward. The other compensation people do is feet out. And so they're trying to use their IT bands and their legs to do all the work. And so this is a very different bridge. Every athlete I do is what they go, oh my gosh, it's so different. And I've had college athletes who are like, I can't remember the last time I did a bridge without pain or back walkovers without pain. And I think every athlete, including male athletes, should do bridges and back walkovers, every workout, but with bands, because I want to teach them to get like long and not compress, because compression is the biggest problem with injury and pain. So feet away, I have them breathe into the band and breathe out. And then I breathe into the band again. And I imagine a string lifting me up from my breastbone and I'm pushing through my arms. It's not my legs that are going to take me into the bridge. It's going to be my arms. Now it's early in the morning. I haven't done anything, so we'll see. So we breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, and I imagine the string lifting me up and I press up into a bridge. Breathe out and come back down. Now, what they're going to notice is when they go to breathe out, their rib cage and pelvis want to come together. When they breathe out, I want them to maintain the arc and stay long. So that's something we want to think about. So the next one, so I have them go up and I don't have them hold it for very long. Breathe in, breathe out, hold, come back down. That's it. And you're basically doing some neural gliding and you're activating the posterior chain. With this setup, my rib cage is not able to flare. It limits the flaring. And the back of it is assisting thoracic extension, scapular rotation, and shoulder opening, right? Which is what we want. So that's why I love this setup. It's super simple. You're already doing bridges. Doesn't take long. So then I have them do the next one, but on the next one, I'm going to have them add bridge push-ups. Now I'm going to try to do a few, but we'll see how many I make. Usually I only do 3, just 3. So nothing takes long. So I breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, and I imagine the stream lifting me up. And then I'm going to push up 3 times. And then I'm going to come down. Now you can tell my wrists haven't done these this morning or in a while, so my hands are sliding a little, but that's okay. If you have like a guy or some people have really tight wrists, you can put a TheraBand out on the floor so that their hands stick on the TheraBand. And if they really are tight and they haven't done bridges in a long time, you can start with their feet on a short mat. That's fine. And then build them down. Don't let them stay there. Don't let them stay there. So then the next one, they do 3 push-ups and they kick over. And then they do that 3 times. So it's a total of 5. And you will have a totally different bridge, totally different athlete if they do that every day. You're going to get much better shaping. It's like a big bang for your buck exercise. So I love those. I also do the other thing that I feel like is prehab, but gymnastics at the same time, is band work. So I take band basics, basically. So I take 4 2/8 bands and I create 2 long, connect 2 of them together. That's 1, 2 of them together to 2. And then I'll show you the wrap. So you can do the wrap. And then you'll see on my Instagram, a lot of videos. You'll see some of the bridge stuff on Instagram. I've had athletes that have had back pain for 11 plus years. And they do it with bridges with the band and they go, what just happened? How is it possible that I did a bridge and not have back pain? Well, if everything is shared, and sure, you're tight. Yeah, you haven't done that. Or your hip flexors are tight, or you're feeling it in your shoulders. Yeah. Or you're feeling it down between your shoulder blades. That's expected because they've never used those muscles in that way. But their back pain will be gone. And if they have back pain the first couple, have them be sure to breathe and make sure they're pushing through their arms and make sure their heels are not close to their bottom. They will try to compensate with their legs because that's how they've done bridges. And then I do it with a bent knee. So make sure they're not doing the straight leg. All right, so let me show you the wrap and then we can talk about the back walkovers and then you guys can check them out on my Instagram. But basically I put on my feet the 2/8 band. So there's 2 loops. So I put it on my arch of my foot and then I wrap it around my ankle. And then the next part, this is where people mess up. They try to grab really high and wrap it. You got to grab low because you'll run out of band and have too much resistance when you get to the arms. So you wrap it around the outside of the ankle and the front underneath the knee. So I'm wrapped around my calf and the front. And then I come behind. I say, just give yourself a wedgie. And you're going to put the band in the middle of your bottom and cross it. And so what's happening is I'm now resisting toe point. So I'm having to push into the band. I'm having to straighten my knee. This is a great way to iron out bent knees. And then I cross it at my butt. And now I'm helping with hip extension. And then I cross it in the front of my rib cage. And now I'm preventing rib flare. And then I go behind my back and I cross it behind my shoulder blades and put it on like a backpack. And now I'm opening and assisting thoracic extension And when I put it on my arms, I'm assisting shoulder flexion or opening the shoulders. So then they put it on the palm of the hand and put it onto the wrist there. Now, if they're doing something where they feel like they're going to slide or they're on bars, I'll put it on just their wrist, put the grips above it. And you can also, if they're just on floor and they don't want it on their hands because it bothers them, they can put it on just their wrist. But I like putting it on their hands because it adds a component of pushing through the wrist. So what I'm doing is I'm resisting the entire kinetic chain, because what this all came up actually, oh, here, let me show you. So when I'm here, I can press up, and I now have resistance and assistance. So I have resistance to rib flaring, assistance to thoracic extension and shoulder flexion. I have assistance to hip extension, resistance. So like, I'm going to know if the band wins and my knee's really bent, I'm going to know. So if I have issues straightening my knee, the first time I do it, the band will probably win and I'm going to notice. So it gives me internal feedback. So my coaching becomes breathe and push. Breathe and push. So where this started, I actually did make this up all on my own. This started because I had a slew of athletes show up with a spondylolisthesis at the same time. And I had been playing with bands for dynamic flexibility and other stuff before that. But in my mind, I was like, what's the number one cause of injuries? Do you have any idea? If you were to think about forces, what's the number one cause of injuries in your mind as a coach?
If you're not physically prepared, like if your body's not prepped for it and you exert a force that's greater than what your physiology is able to handle or compensate, then a lot of times there's going to be weaknesses through that chain of the forces trying to, transfer from one to the other that end up causing injury.
Right. So what you just said was a force greater than I'm capable of sustaining. Yeah.
Yep.
When I have a force that's greater than I'm capable of sustaining, I end up getting a compressive load. Makes sense?
Yep.
And that compressive load is what causes injury. And then what's worse is compression rotation. Like that's how we get a lot of like meniscus, disc issues, tearing of ligaments, like those kind of things happen when you have a compressive rotational force. So prehab, if we can teach an athlete to do their sport, learning how to activate their muscles in an entire kinetic chain, lengthening in a lengthened position, opening and reducing compressive loads, then doesn't it make sense we could, one, improve the athlete's ability to transfer heavy loads efficiently and decrease their injuries? So ultimately, good athletic performance is the person who wins, Simone Biles, the ability to efficiently transfer loads at high levels. So the more I can transfer, the higher I would go, the faster I will go, the more dynamic I can be. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So what I've found by using these bands is we can improve performance while at the same time reducing our injury risk. And we can do it in less time because they're things you're already doing. So that's my favorite thing. So literally this little wrap that I do, I teach them how to do back walkovers. Now, number one thing is that every gymnast does this. They throw their arms up and the rib comes out. And so I have to teach them that I want them to come up. I call it coming up into the ram's horn. So I like have them draw a line I'm like, imagine a string from the inside of your arch, up the front of your shins, front of your thigh to your belly button, underneath your rib cage, up the front of your spine, coming up, and it exits behind your ear into ram's horns. And so I want you to come up from your feet. I also teach them, because a lot of athletes they have that nice collapsy arch where their foot collapses in, right? Like, so I teach them about the 4 points. There's a point on your ball, your big toe, pinky toe, inside your heel, outside your heel. I make them feel them. And a lot of them are really good at going in and horrible at going out. And I'm like, no, I really want you to go out, in and out, and then find middle. And then I want you to come up into the ram's horns. And so once they've learned what it means to come up in the ram's horns, sometimes I put a 2-pound bag of pinto beans, really big investment at your gym. This pays off. I'm telling you, a bucket of 2-pound pinto beans, do some beam complex and some floor basics, changes how they do their, but you have to teach them to connect. You have to teach them, but they tend to just have something to come up into. So I kept thinking about this spondylolisthesis thing and these injuries, and I'm like, in the sport, especially like gymnastics, we're always open chain. And how do we know that the body works best? Well, the research shows it's closed chain activities. Closed chain. Well, how can I make a back handspring closed chain? So I came up with a band. It's the best I could do. I want to give proprioceptive feedback to the entire kinetic chain, create a closed chain environment in an open chain world, right? Where they're doing back handspring. So the same thing when I put something on their head, they now created a closed chain from their feet to the beans, and they have something to go up into. And so now I can get a straight body position very easily. And maybe I just teach them here, and maybe I do with beams, just your basic kicks, forward kicks, sideways kicks, backwards kicks, right? Like I just do walking kicks. I do beam complex, the old Romanian beam complex. You can't do everything with beams on your head, but these are things you're already doing that change how an athlete connects to their body, that changes everything from compressing in. So who's a good bar worker? Is it the athlete that pulls in on bars and muscles bars, or is it the athlete that pushes away? It's the athlete that pushes away. That's the good swinger. Well, that goes for actually everything. The back handspring that closes their shoulders and pulls in, it's not a good back handspring. Their shoulders drop faster than their butt comes over. They hinge at their low back. They close at their shoulders. Then they have to bend their arms to get off the beam, right? So if they're pushing away, much better performance, but also all that closing and dumping, each point is a place where they're leaking power. And if they're leaking power, it's going somewhere. Their joints, their ligaments, their growth plates, depends on their age. If they're between the age of, 10, well, younger guys that start at 7 or whatever, but like just growth period, 10 to 14, it's going to be their growth plate. That's where they're going to feel it. That's where their problem's going to be. If they're older and they're in their 20s, it's going to be their Achilles tendon. It's going to be their ACL, right? It's going to be their rotator cuff, because their growth plates are closed, and the weakest link will become the ligaments or the capsule or the muscle. So I came up with this, and it's super simple. You just don't change what you're already doing. You change how you're doing it. So I teach them 4 points in and out, find middle, come up through your ram's horns. And then instead of having this and having their habitual pattern, I change their pattern. I say, I want you to do a stick them up. Now I want you to stay tall, because what they tend to want to do is dump forward with their pelvis, right? And when they kick that leg forward on the back wall, I'm like, no, I want you to stay tall and just move your leg. I'm teaching them to move segmentally. Because they should. They should move segmentally. So then I just say, okay, now I want you to breathe and press into the band in all directions, both directions, and lead with your fingertips. And go into a bridge so that I get a segmental back walkover. And then I take them into a back handspring. Then I take them into a handstand. Then I take them into a cartwheel. Then I take them into a round off back handsprings. I had the first athlete I did this with had a spondy. And her hypermobility was so bad that when she breathed, her low back would move, would rotate and extend, which is, I've had a few of them come in. They exist. But that's a challenge. She's like, she couldn't understand. She had seen so many people. Oh, by the way, if they're in the right amount of resistance, if they're in triceratop arms, call us triceratop arms. So if you do triceratop arms, they're in the right resistance. And then they talk about taking their bands off and it's hard and etc. Shove the top of the band into their sports bra, their Leo. They don't have to take it off at the moment, but they can take a chill. Right? So these are all excuses the kids will come up with, and the coaches will get frustrated. Well, it's hard to wrap, or it takes forever. It takes forever the first week, and then they figure it out. Sometimes it's not even a week, sometimes it's 2 days, right? And then the athletes get super fast at it. And what they find, and you send them some videos, you show them some videos. The 1 or 2 athletes that like complain because they don't want anything on their body, take a video. This is your back handspring now. This is your back handspring with the bands. Which one do you like? Right? Which one's faster? Which one's got a better shape? And then they go, oh, yeah, the bands are really helpful. Yeah. You can tell I've gone through a lot of obstacles, and I'm just giving you guys all the obstacles you'll come into, because there may be a few more. So reach out and let me know. I'll help you get over, breach them. It's worth it. It's worth it, because so with this athlete, she was level 10. And when she did her double backs, she would stop her set here. And then of course, just dump down, short landing, etc. And we stuck these on her, and her arms went flying all the way up. And she doubled over, and she didn't know where she was because she rotated so fast compared to where she was used to, that she over rotated her first one. But I have some amazing video of that. And that was the beginning of, like, if we add feedback, we can actually, so I have had athletes, and now this is number 1. I don't use the bands in a situation where the athlete becomes fearful or doesn't feel confident or comfortable using it. I also don't jump to doing double backs with the bands. They learn what I just showed you, every one of them, elite, low level, high level, doesn't matter. They learn the same thing. You take them through the basics and you stop where they're comfortable. No band, though I know it will help their biomechanics, no band can overpower their experience of fear or uncomfortable with the new. So they need to be confident and comfortable, and I let them progress. So even if, like, they just do, I had one college athlete that her flight was so good that she took it to the low beam with the bands. And I said, dude, you don't have to. But I could just do it on the floor line. She's like, no, it's so much better. So she took her flick lay on the low beam, and she had the bands on her wrist and on her ankles, not on her feet, right? And I said, well, if you're comfortable with it, do it. And then that year, she made lineup. She was borderline for making lineup for her Yurchenko and for making lineup for beam. And that year, after doing the band work, she made starting lineup, and like the first, like one of the spots, it was like first, I think it was 3rd spot up. Like she was the most consistent. Like she was, and she actually made it. She progressed on vault, like all the way to the end. Like I believe at nationals, she qualified as an individual, where that beginning of that season, she literally was borderline on even making lineup, right? Because she couldn't get her shoulders open for the entry. And so I love the bands because you can use them with stuff you're already doing, your floor basics, your beam basics. So I at least recommend doing floor and beam basics with them. And then go from there. But I even have athletes, like I said, I've had athletes go all the way up to double backs from the floor into a pit or a resi, double backs and double fulls on the tumble track. But a lot of my athletes, they don't want to do a double full with it. They just do their layout and their full, and they feel great. Then when they do their double full, it's better, right? I've had athletes do Yurchenko drills, like the mat stack drills on the floor, flipping over.
Yeah.
What else? I've had athletes do giants, and their giants improve tremendously, because you want to get them to push down underneath the bar.
Mm-hmm.
Push into what? Like you're visually telling them to look for the bar, but yet they're actually really can't see the bar because that puts them in a pike. And so if you can give them something to push into, then they can actually get that length at the bottom. And then when they come up into the tap of the giant, they have something to tap into for the shape change. This is great for athletes who are mesomorphs, who are really muscular, but it's super awesome and almost imperative for the hyperflexy athlete, because this gives feedback. So those athletes, the hyperflexy athletes, they move too much before their brain actually gets information. And so if we put the bands on them, they get information sooner. Like I had this super hyperflexy athlete, borderline Ehlers-Danlos, really struggling with getting a round-up back handspring. And we put her in the bands, and her round-up back handspring was, like, amazing, and her fear also went away because she could feel where she was in space better. And so the carryover is really great. At first, you, do all your basics and then take them off and do the rest of the workout. Sometimes with the athletes, when they start to lose their technique or form, or you notice that they're like pulling in again, I'll have them do another basic pass with the band on and then take the band off and go do the harder pass. So that there's like, because you have to realize you're asking them to take a new neural highway, like a new way of moving. And the longevity of that is not at first very long. Like it might be that it lasts for 3 passes. It might be that it lasts for the whole rest of floor. It might be that you do bands and it lasts for a couple of workouts, but usually the first time, that's really would be amazing the first time. But like the first time you do it, it's usually a small carryover, and then the carryover gets longer and longer until their brain becomes, that's the way I'm going to move from now on. So
Yeah.
so simple things. So we did the wrist, we did the bridge, and then adding the bands into all your basics are super great rehabs. And I think one aspect that gets lost during competition season is basics. Which what's your experience with that?
No, and I think basics are super important. And I know for me personally, I try to keep it in on like say like on a Monday of, the first day that they're in during the week. That's what we kind of focus on, even if it's competition day. Now, if they have like a short week, for example, like this weekend, we have it's level 7 and 8 regionals with the level 6 all stars, depending on when you leave. So, say I'm leaving on Thursday. Our athletes don't train on Thursdays. So then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is when they're in the gym. So yesterday, I did a little bit of basics with those who are going to regionals, but then they got right into their assignment, right? Because you don't want to take one day, especially when they have a shorter week, to take away from opportunity to get turns. But on, during the competition season, I think it's really important because I start to notice when I just focus on the volume of routines and volume of those routine skills, I start to see the quality dwindle of their gymnastics just because there's nothing to reinforce their routine habits, right? Or what details you want to really do.
Yeah.
And so I like to go back and either spot them a lot, right? Or go back and do, say on bars, handstands, or go back and do lines on floors and go through all your walkovers, your back handsprings, your, bounders, your all those things, vault, going back to just hurdle drills, running drills, blocking drills, handstands, um, and then beam, the same thing. Because again, they just get into a habit of just doing, right? And they stop thinking. And there's a time and place, right, for you to think and not think. Like when you're doing a routine, you want it just to fire in sequence. You don't want them to be thinking and stressing too much. But when it's time to do those basics, they should be thinking a lot, right? And they should be paying attention to what's happening. And I tell my athletes this all the time. I'm like, the most important time during our practice is our conditioning and our stretching lines time, because that's when you're gaining the most information that you can actually absorb. When you're doing your skills, it's a lot harder for you to gain that information, or if I give you a correction, for you to actually process that. Because if you didn't do the work to be able to translate what, or even just to decipher what I'm telling you, then it sounds super foreign and you don't know what the heck I'm really saying. Because when we went and did it on the floor during your warm up time, you didn't pay attention to it. You just went through the motions and said, okay, say we're doing kicks right on floor, and your just hands are here and you're just kicking, kicking, kicking. And then you notice you go do your jumps, right? You do a split jump and then this drops, this drops, this drops. And I say, hey, your left shoulder is low. And you're like, okay, and it drops and it drops. But then I go back and I say, all right, let's do kicks on the line. And you're just like this. I'm like, this is where you're gaining that information. Now you can understand what this means to have it even or my shoulder drop because I can feel it on the floor. And, to answer your question, yeah, it's important to keep doing those basics during season.
Yeah, it's interesting. So if you throw bands on that, she will instantly know that her arm is dropped because the band will start to roll off the shoulder that's dropped. And if you go to do a sit into a back handspring and they sit unevenly, the band will pop off that hip. So like what I love about the band, I'll ask them, what's the band telling you? Oh, I sat to the left. Yeah, great. How are you going to fix that? I'm going to sit straight. And so I get buy-in with them, and I'm also getting their brain to tell me. Like, so part of my verbal communication, part of the work I do with them is using their brain and the tools we have with their brain and the neuroscience that we know. If we can get them to feel something on their own, we can get them to judge and decide what needs to happen next. Now, clearly you have to guide them, right? Because sometimes they have no clue. So sometimes it's a video, sometimes it's me actually helping them, like, okay, here's where we want to go. And I put them physically through it, like you said, spotting them through it. And then also just breaking the movement patterns down. So one of the things I love to do with the bands is the L push-up stuff. But I've been teaching that for a long time on how to load the wrist, and we can talk about that loading upper body stuff later. So I'm going to save that for that podcast. But I've noticed that, it's like the telephone effect. There were some things and details that got lost in the process. So there's some details we need to iron out when we go to that upper lower body loading stuff. But that being said, I love to find that straight body shape with the bands because they have something to push into, and the band will pull them down more if they're in one direction or the other, and they'll feel it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do. One more, because I know we need to get going. One more piece for like everyday stuff is that you got to make sure that your ankles, hips, knees are all nice and so I love exercises. They're big bang for your buck, mobility and stability at the same time, right?
Mhm.
Like I don't do much sustained stretching ever, really. There is a little place for it. You could do some sustained long stretches at the end of you know of your workout, that kind of thing, when the tissue's nice and warm. But it's interesting, research is all over the board when it comes to stretching. No one can really agree, other than there's definitely some great benefits to neural dynamic stretching. Especially, so what I've found with myself and with lots of athletes that I work with is that they rarely actually feel a muscle stretch. It's usually a neural tension that they're feeling. And the way we know that is that if you move a distal part, so if they're in a pike stretch and I have them just move their head and they feel the tension or the pain or the stretch, whatever words they're going to use, discomfort change, it's neural. My hamstring does not attach to my head. It's not a hamstring problem. It's a neural dynamic problem. And so the problem where people get kind of lost in the weeds a little bit when it comes to stretching is that they forget that, so a muscle only goes from 1 to 2 joints. Like, it depends, it's a 1 joint muscle or 2 joint muscle. So it crosses 1 or 2 joints. So you may have to stretch 1 or 2 joints, but the nerves are attached from the brain, the lining of our brain, all the way down the spinal cord, all the way down to my fingertips, all the way down to my toes. We have 45 miles of nerves. I'm pretty sure that that's really close to the amount of miles between you and I.
Mm.
Like, it's really close. Like, that's a lot of miles. And so maybe it would make you just to the edge of the North Austin, the domain. But
Yeah.
like, it's a far distance, right? Like, and that's all in our body. And those nerves are interconnected. And so if I move my head, the nerves in my fingers and my toes move. And so what people don't realize is that most of the time they're actually stretching the nervous system and not muscles. And most of the time, the limiting factor is neural dynamic or nervous system issue. So if I can take an athlete, which we can talk about in the upper extremity stuff with shoulder stuff, but if I can take an athlete, which I can, and you can give me 10, and I can promise you at least 9, because I might run into one that's weird, but I'm just going to say that. But I can take at least 9 of them and improve their shoulder flexibility, their teres major, or their lat, or their whatever flexibility for actual shoulder flexibility. And I can improve it from 130 to 150, sometimes 180. with one exercise that's a total of 3, 6, 9 repetitions. So that is not a flexibility issue. That's not a muscle flexibility issue. It's a neural dynamic issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that is actually the bulk of what people deal with. So if I'm talking about neural dynamic, so I have something that I call the yoga nerve flow, which is a super great, and I have a video if anyone is watching. I think that, no, I haven't posted it on my Facebook. It's not, maybe I should post on Facebook. But if you're watching, you're welcome to contact me. However, we have down on the link, and I'll send you the yoga nerve flow link. We don't have time for me to go through the whole thing, but it's a neural dynamic stretch that takes about 5 minutes, and it's a great warm up. And it's one of those warm ups you could throw in instead of running around the floor. You could do a yoga nerve flow. Not that you didn't need to do it every single day, but if you did the yoga nerve flow and you did the bridge with band, you've covered your whole body. You've covered your whole body. And you're getting a whole bunch of neural dynamics. So you're getting mobility and stability at the same time. Now, that being said, we can't not leave the prehab without talking about the ankles.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to briefly talk about like flexibility and some strength for that, because there is a strength component, and we can talk more about the strength actually when we talk about the ankle. But what the take home today, sorry, you're seeing my feet instead of my face, but the take home today is that it's not about what you do, it's how you're doing it, right? So that being said, most commonly, a lot of people stretch out their calves. They do this thing like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they go against a wall and they push.
Mm-hmm.
Where people get in trouble is how they're doing that. So a lot of times, I'm gonna tilt the camera down a little bit more. A lot of times when they're here and they're stretching this way, they're actually collapsing. They're collapsing their arch this way. And what you'll see is happening is I'm stretching the inside of my calf and not the outside. I'm actually pinching the outside of my ankle. So that's going to get, if I stretch like that, how do you think I'm going to land? I'm going to land like that, collapsed. And so if I'm a growing athlete, I'm putting a lot of tension on my growth plate, which is going to be Severs. And if my weakest link is my knee, now when my foot collapses like that, now my angle of pull on my patellar tendon is at an angle instead of straight on. Now I'm getting Osgoods, right? If that's where my weakest link is. So one really great prevention is stretching your calves properly with good mechanics. So super simple. You have the 4 points on your feet, ball of your big toe, pinky toe, inside your heel, outside your heel. I want you to play with the 4 points because you need to find them. So in and out. And then find middle. And now when they do their little marching, make sure that they stay even on their 4 points, right? So I'm not collapsing. I'm keeping my arch. And the same thing when they do their calf stretch. When they're here, I want them mobility-wise to be able to play with inside 2 points, outside 2 points, inside, outside. But when they go to stretch, I want them centered. And they can lean in from there. And then I turn it into a neural dynamic stretch by having them look up. And then when they rock back, look down. Look up and look down. And I'm always thinking entire kinetic chain. So I'm also watching what their back is doing. So if they're pushing on the wall and they're throwing forward in their back and they're arching, I don't want that. I want rib cage and pelvis connected so that they're stretching here. Now they're having to use their core a little bit. The other thing I like to look for is, are they wiggling to one side or the other? They love to shoot their butt out. And if they stretch like that, where they shoot their butt out like this, guess how they're going to land? Butt out. If their butt's out, knee is in, ankle's getting hammered, or knee is getting hammered, depends on the weakest link. So I teach them when they're doing the calf nerve glide, where they look up. Can you see my head? See if I can get a little. Yeah, so I have them look up.
It has to be
Hold
a
on.
little higher.
Yeah, thanks. Help me out.
Yeah.
Help me out. I can't see everything. There we go.
Yep.
When I have them here and I lean forward, I have them look up and then back, but I make sure that their headlights of their hips Their headlights on their shoulders and their hips are going forward straight, not tilted. They're even. They're going forward and back straight. And you can do this with the knee. I have Taylor Swift over here. We had a birthday party. It was the Taylor Swift birthday party this weekend. But when I'm here, I look up and then back, and then you can also do it with the knee bent because you have your soleus. So my knee is bent, and as it's bent, I'm looking up and then straightening. And so I've turned it into not just a muscle stretch, but a neural dynamic stretch. At the same time, you're doing stability of the core, rib cage, pelvis, as well as stability of the ankle, hip, and knee, because we're not allowing all the stuff to roll in. So the biggest thing, if I could say any one quote for the day, it's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it. Which means you don't need extra time. You just need to do what you're already doing better, more efficiently. And then kind of know what are your big, so like I try to give you some stuff that's like the whole body.
Yep.
And sadly, I think all those things need to happen year round. But they're already things you're doing in the workout. It's not something that, so this is where there's a disconnect. When prehab becomes separate, number one, that's not how the brain works. What we know is the brain, in the world of motor learning, in order for the brain to learn something new, it has to have what's called randomized training. So you do a little bit here, you do something else. You do a little bit here, you do something else. You do a little bit here, you do something else. So thus, you do the wrist thing, a set of 10, then you go do your pommels. And then, oh, you're vaulting. Well, then maybe you want to work on your landings before you do your stick drills that you probably are doing every vault day, I hope. Then maybe you should do a few of the nerve glides with the ankles, right? And then do your bounces, your sprint down the hall, right? Like then it's just part of the routine. It's part of the routine. And when I talk about lower extremity later, we'll talk about how I recommend like some squatting stuff and some jump stuff to do right before you do your stick drills. It integrates. And it just needs to be part of the routine. It's not even prehab. It's just an is. Like this is how we move. So the whole concept behind it, I want to move this way. Now I want to move this way in something harder, like a drill or a stick drill or whatever the next progression is. And now I want to do that same thing in my big skill, in my routine. So it just becomes a part of who you are and what you're doing. But again, it's not what you do, it's how you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate, all that information and answering some of those kind of questions that we may have as gymnastics coaches specifically on what to do and how to integrate those things for those who may not already know or are doing those. Now, on another podcast, I'll probably ask some more questions about some of these things because I could already start to think, when we were talking about bridges, like back walkovers. Well, when you're doing a back walkover, isn't your feet down and your hands down? And talking about all these other things that coaches might think about, because a lot of times, and which I think is fortunate for me personally, is because I didn't grow up doing the sport my whole life. So I don't see it from a standpoint of this is what you do because that's how it's always been done. And so a lot of times I'm willing to question things and I'm willing to do different things and to find different ways of doing things just because it hasn't ingrained in my head like, hey, this is the way to do it. And I've seen it done this way and be successful. I'm still in this journey of finding out what is my methodologies of how I want to really develop athletes. And so I'm hungry for the information and for people who are, professionals in certain areas and to give different perspectives. Because a lot of the things that you're saying, like I'm already in my head, like I agree with it because I see it from those same standpoints, right? I talk about like in back handsprings, it's always long to your hands. I want to see you be as long as possible, and you want to, and for them, they don't understand like what long means. Sometimes they think long means straight, like
Yes.
straight long, right? Whereas like, no, that's not what I mean. Like you can make your body long in an extension that doesn't, like you were talking about, that compression aspect, right? Um,
You just hit on
and
a great topic of like the athlete not understanding the cueing that we're using. So that's why I love some of the physical aspects. So it's called tension to task. If I give the body a task, the body will create tension to it. And like I don't fall over when I stand up. It's attention to task. So that's why I love the band, because it's like, what is long? Well, I can teach them just in a standing position how to get long. And then you can start using that word long. Like, that's long. I want you to get long. When I do a back handspring, I want you to be long. Now do your long back handspring, be long. And so what I'm doing is I'm ingraining, it's very Pavlovian, right? So you're
yeah,
doing is you're the bell. The word long will become your bell.
yeah,
And so something like I've used the word ram's horns or breathe or push, like, and I have to kind of talk to the athlete because the word long may not work for all of them.
yeah,
Sometimes it may be banana or rainbow. I want your art to be a rainbow. So sometimes I have to ask them for their own image, but you hit onto a point. That's actually one of the like stumbling blocks or obstacles to coaching. It's like what I'm saying and makes sense in my brain does not make sense to the athlete. It
yeah,
might make sense for 5 out of the 10, right? Which is great. But now what about the other five?
yeah.
How do we get them on board? I love it. I love it.
Right. And then, last thing for me is I also try to define to them two things: the difference between tension and pressure. Sometimes they think they're um they enter you can replace those words as if they're
They're
the same thing.
interchangeable. Yeah.
Yes, that's the word.
Yeah.
Um, but they're not. Like to me, I
No.
think tension as stiffness. Like if I have tension in my arm, right? So my joint is locked out, right? So there's tension. I'm squeezing my muscle. Now, once I actually put pressure, it's that punch you're talking about when you're actively moving here. Those are the things I like to say. Like when you're doing a back handspring, right? So if I'm doing a back handspring, you have to have stiffness, right, to in order to translate the um, forces
Mhm.
properly. But at the same time, there should be pressure, like extension pressure, right? So then, which again, I guess you could say pressure is extension, right? Like extending through my feet when I'm jumping, or extending through my shoulders, like in a handstand or on bars, or on beam. And
So
um,
for you, are you saying pressure is pushing away, being able to resist against the apparatus or the force that's coming at you? That's the pressure, the push away part.
yes, is
And the
actively.
tension, yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Actively.
Yep, and the tension is the what the body needs to do in order to be able to translate that, right? Because and I do this example with them all the time. I tell them, I'm like, it's like it's nearly impossible for you to actually push. Like if say you're in a push-up position or a handstand push-up, and I tell you to bend your arms, and now I ask you to shrug your shoulders, it's nearly impossible for you to do it, right? Because there's no tension yet. You haven't created tension. Like you have to create the tension first, right?
Yeah.
In order for you to um actually use your shoulders and push. Right now, you can get away with it and like different things. Like you can bend your knees and do a calf raise, right? But you can't really like get up off the ground unless you create tension, right? So before I really jump, I have to have some sort of tension for the forces to travel through, and then I can have that pressure show up through my ankles and explode, right?
Yeah, Gerald George talks a ton about the buildup of tension in order to transfer the load. Yeah.
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 So tension, stiffness, right? And for pressures, extension, like being able to push, through the apparatus or through the bar, through the floor, actually trying to extend yourself away while maintaining tension when you need to, right? And it also is the tension in your core, right? In your hips, the stiffness in your hips that you need if you're running, if you're doing a hurdle, you don't want to collapse and hit the ground on a hurdle and you pike your hips back. Now it creates an unnecessary stiffness through your knees, which end up being a hyperextension in your knee. So it's like a lot of times I break that stuff down with them and say, hey, these are things that I want you to understand, you know? And I use it a lot really on bars. It's like, okay, there's a difference between tension and pressure. I need tension before pressure. You can't put pressure on the bar until you have tension, right? Now you can get away with trying to do a, a bent arm handstand push up or circle that pushes, but before you can actually actively push all the way through, you got to get these extremities to lock out, right? The joint to lock out, and then I can actually push through, or else it just dumps. And now I have to deal with my body just flailing, and I have to play catch up the whole time, right? So, and we can kind of discuss that a little bit more and break it
Yes,
down.
do
So,
it. Let's discuss it more because yes, we should talk about the bridging because it's like the bridging controversy, like it's like
yes,
to bridge or not to bridge. That's the question.
yeah,
When, how?
and even when to start and how young to start and stuff like that. So on our one of our follow up podcasts, we'll talk about those things and have those discussions. And I appreciate you taking time this morning and having that conversation. And thank you everybody for tuning in to another episode with Brandi Smith with Perfect 10.0 PT and discussing all these different things that again to us we may think as just prehab, but as she had talked about, these are things that we're already doing, and we just have to change the way that we're doing it. Now, like I said in the beginning, I'll put her information below. You can ask her any questions, like she said. You can reach out to her. You can email her, reach out to her on Instagram or Facebook. She has a Facebook page that you can join if you want to get more information, more education. Brandi, from the conversations I have, is super passionate about educating coaches and educating athletes, so they have more information for them to become the best versions of themselves, or help coaches help their athletes become the best athletes and people that they can. Tune in for these follow-up episodes as we kind of talk about upper body. We kind of dive into questions about some of the topics we talked about in lower body stuff that you can do to add to your training. Thank you again. I'll see you guys on the next episode.